and welcome to another week of our study on the parables from Luke. This week we are on to lost things. And so this week we're going to be talking about the parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin. So what are your first initial reflections on that?
Well, I'm reminded that parables, if they're doing their job, they're going to jostle our faith furniture around. They're going to shake us up a bit and maybe call into question some of our assumptions that we have about God, that we have about ourselves, that we have about each other. And so, once again, as last week's parable of the Good Samaritan challenged us in many ways and kind of started off gently, oh yes, do good to others, yay, and challenged us and scandalized us by talking about somebody who was an outsider who was doing God's will. I think we're going to find this week with the parables of the lost coin and the lost sheep, once again, man, God is working with the outsiders.
Yeah, and again, that different levels of things.
Yep.
Again, two parables that have been included in lots and lots of Sunday school curriculum for young kids because they're tangible, they're concrete. It's that whole thing that God loves us, and so God comes after us even when we're lost, and God will always bring us home. Amen. Great lesson for kids.
Great lesson, yep.
Wonderful. But there's some deeper levels there.
Because we find out, as you've pointed out before, and I hope you'll say some more about this tonight, that God is not the mathematician that we like to think he would be. That he's 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in God's mathematics, or 1 is greater than 99 in God's mathematics.
Exactly, and that's what ticks off the Pharisees and the scribes. I think the way this parable is even set up in the gospel. It opens up as, now all the tax collectors and sinners, all those outsiders, were coming near to listen to Jesus. We have this divided response. So we have the tax collectors and the sinners for whom this is amazingly good news. This is compassion and grace and mercy, and they know that. But it's the divided response, because we also have the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. So absolutely a divided response. So we have the lost one, the one sheep, the one who is the outcast, the one who wanders away. And then we have the 99 who stayed faithful, the ones who didn't wander away. But it's the shepherd, as you said, who goes after the one and leaves the 99. One is greater than 99.
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
And that doesn't make sense, even to us today, I think, in our world. It doesn't make sense that you would go after one and leave the 99.
It's not good business.
It's not good business. And even in, I think that what this is telling us is that in God's kingdom, might does not make right. Numbers are not critical in God's kingdom. We make them critical, don't we, in our churches? Man, attendance isn't what it was 20 years ago. Our pews are emptier than they were, and we're not the same size. And man, some church down the street's packing them in. They must be doing it right, and we're not doing it right. That's not, I think, in the spirit of what this story is certainly about. Numbers aren't critical to God.
God's math is different than
God's
the world.
math is different. God cares about the one. And if you're that one, if you're on the outside looking in and God cares about you, that means everything.
But if you're the 99, it might, for you might not look at that and say it's good news. After all, it's a little crazy because God goes after that one sheep and supposedly leaves the 99. And so what is going to happen to the 99? Instead of having one lost sheep and 99 safe ones, I don't know, the shepherd might end up with one found sheep and 99 who strayed, 99 who went the other way while the shepherd was off looking for the one.
Yeah. The shepherd is risking things. So is it possible if we're saying that God is like that shepherd, are we also saying then that God is risking things too?
Sure.
If that shepherd is vulnerable, is God vulnerable? I think so.
Yeah.
You can't look at Jesus on the cross and say that God is not vulnerable.
Right.
That's just not possible.
And that's scandalous.
It is scandalous. We don't want to hear that.
No. And think about that too, because if you've been one of those faithful 99 who stayed, but God is going after and giving the same grace and love and attention and mercy and forgiveness and everything that God gives to that one, that doesn't seem fair.
Right. Right.
But God's not fair.
But God is love.
God is gracious and compassionate. You know, we sing it every Sunday in Lent. You know, return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love.
Amen.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the coin.
Okay.
You know, the first one was like, one is lost, and so you've lost 1% of your inventory, 99%, you know, it stayed there, and you risk everything to go after the one. Now in this one, it's 10 coins and have lost one. 10%. Okay, it makes sense to go after 10%, maybe that makes a little more sense. But it's still just as crazy a story, because the woman loses one coin. She scours the house, does everything to find it. And when she finds it, instead of saying, aha, it's safe, I'm going to put it back with the others, instead, she uses that coin and supposedly, most likely more, to throw a party. To throw a party for all her neighbors. And so all of a sudden, these parables, it's about God's compassion and God going after the one and being lost and found, but it's also all about joy. And it's, I think, all about God's invitation to all of us to be a part of that joy, to share in the joy of finding that was lost.
Yeah, and so if God is putting God's self, okay, Jesus is saying God is like the woman, right? Who rejoices over finding this one coin. I think sometimes for us, it's hard for us to imagine that God rejoices over us. We think of, you know, God the great lawgiver, God the whatever you think of God, but we don't often think of God as the party host, as somebody who is just so incredibly overjoyed with us that when we're back in the purse, back in the fold, whatever that might be, there is rejoicing that God has over us. What does that say about God's love? You wouldn't rejoice over something you didn't love. Right.
But that's where the scandal comes as well. And I think that's where the grumbling comes from.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem fair, does it? That God would rejoice that much over someone who was lost, over someone who maybe didn't deserve that kind of love and grace. After all, the Pharisees believed that they followed the law, and the law was pretty clear on how you stayed in a right relationship with God. You kept kosher, you kept clean, you did all the right things. And for those who weren't doing that, that maybe wasn't, you know, that would be good news for God to find them. But what about those who remained faithful? And there, I think, is where the parable convicts us. And I don't know, we have the lost sheep here. It's where the parable convicts us, I believe. Because who doesn't kind of look at that and say, it's not fair?
Right.
And where do we go with that?
And the challenge for us then too is to rejoice with God over this gift that we're given of life, and not think about the gift in relation to our neighbor. Well, I know what I got from God, but what did my neighbor get? We're not to concern ourselves with that. Let's just focus on what God has given us.
Yeah.
Right? You tell a great story about
Well, it's actually Alan Culpepper who tells the story, who wrote a wonderful commentary on the Gospel of Luke. And he tells this Jewish story about a farmer who was a hardworking farmer, and God came to him and said, I will reward you, and I give you 3 wishes, and the only stipulation is that whatever you wish for, I will grant, but your neighbor will get double. And so the farmer couldn't believe his good luck, so his first wish he makes, he says, I wish for 100 sheep. And God gives it to him, and he is thrilled. He feels that he is so wealthy. He has been given such a great gift. He has 100 sheep. And he's happy until he looks at his neighbor and realizes, wait, my neighbor did nothing and got 200 sheep. And it makes him angry. So he makes his second wish, and he says, I wish for 100 acres. And he sees all the land that God has given him. And he's so happy until he sees that his neighbor received 200. And he becomes so enraged and so jealous that his neighbor has more than he has when he has worked so hard, that his third wish is, I wish that you would strike me blind in one eye. And with that, God weeps. It's hard for us, I think, sometimes to look at people and, at least from our perspective, see that, gee, do they deserve all the grace and the love that God gives? And that's where we're convicted, I think, in these parables. And where God is saying, no, don't be jealous, celebrate, rejoice. And we really can't understand the mercy, the love, the grace that God gives until we are also able to rejoice.
And if you think of it too, we've all been lost, but we're all found. Mm-hmm. And where are we all found? We're all found at the foot of the cross. Mm-hmm. And that ought to be enough.
Exactly.
Some interesting things to think about in this
right.
In this study this week, for sure.
So we're anxious to hear what you have to say and what your thoughts are. So feel free to comment, feel free to join in the online discussion. And I look forward to continuing this study with you all in the coming weeks. And so for Winston and for both of us, thanks for being with us, and have a blessed week.
God bless you all. Let's try this again.